Thank you, everybody. We decided to hold this event right here in between the administrative state, in this case, the Labor Department, and Congress, the legislative branch, because we wanted to highlight the contrast between the two. In Congress, things are, for the most part, done out in the open. There are definitely more backroom shenanigans than we would like, but the hearings are open to the public. C-SPAN records every single debate. You can read any bill online, and most importantly, if you don't like what's going on, you can change it. You can call your representative, or you can vote them out. Transparency, accountability, that's how we should write all of our laws. Contrast that with the building behind us. Contrast that with the bureaucracy behind us. Right now, most of us have no idea what's going on behind those walls. Only cameras that are in there are those for security. Maybe you can get a meeting with the Deputy Assistant Secretary for annoying phone calls if you're lucky. But even if you're unhappy with their performance, they're not going anywhere. You don't vote out the career bureaucrats. And technically, there are good practices that the bureaucracy must follow. But technically, it doesn't always follow those practices. And the American people are paying the price. We as a country spend up to $2 trillion each and every year just to comply with Washington's mandates. Truth is, we need rules. We need rules that are clear, firm rules that we can live by. The question is, what is the best way to write the rules that we live by? To keep our air and our water clean, to protect consumers from scams and ripoffs, but also to create jobs and to expand opportunity. It does not have to be either or. We can have and do both. And here we are calling for Washington to change the very way it writes its rules. That's why we wrote this plan, to make it more accountable to the American people. We're saying, tell us your costs of proposed regulations. Make them public. Tell us what they will do to low-income families. Base your decisions on sound science, not science fiction, with reproducible results and concrete data. And if your proposal is really so important, if the proposals that are cooked up in these bureaucracies are really so important, then let the people's elected representatives decide. No major regulation should become law unless Congress takes a vote. Let me say that again. No major regulation should become law unless Congress takes a vote. In fact, we should consider setting a cap on the amount of regulatory costs that Washington can impose every year. Because the burden should not be on the people to justify themselves to Washington. The burden should be on Washington to justify itself to the people. I'm going to ask our chairman to talk more about the specific topics, like energy and banking. But here's the big idea. If we want clear, fair rules in this country, then we need to empower the rule makers who are the American people. This is the third in our six-part agenda, A Better Way. If you want to learn more about our agenda, A Better Way, please go to our website, better.gop. With that, I'd like to welcome our distinguished majority leader, Mr. McCarthy from California.
Hey. Well, thank you, everyone, for elected into public office. I was a small business owner. My very first, it was a I learned 3 lessons, and you're the last one to be paid. But it was rewarding. I feared the most. And it was a faceless, nameless, changed the direction of my business. That wasn't listening and could not hear. You know, year after year, that's what bureaucrats do behind us inside the Department of Labor. If you just look in the short time frame, overtime rule, tying down the employees that we want to give flexibility to. Our fiduciary, limiting the financial advice others could actually have. Our silica, just adding massive costs to the builders. And that's just one department here in Washington. You know, small business and the millions of people they employ, they aren't the enemies. They're not the enemies to be regulated. They're good people, And they deserve government to serve them, not run them out of business. Now, the members of this task force took a look at every aspect, but they kept in mind that small business, that individual that wants to create something maybe in a garage that could even build into something bigger. And the American people need those jobs. They need better pay. They need opportunities to increase their skills. Provide a little better than before. Each and every regulation produced in Washington should have those goals in mind. And if it fails to produce those results, we just shouldn't have it. That's why the people across America should have a voice. And that voice, they lend that power every 2 years to their representative in Congress. Not to a faceless bureaucrat that thinks they know better, that have never been in to a sandwich shop and know how to run it. They weren't there the first one in work and the last one to leave and last one to be paid. Let their voices be heard, and that's a better way for America.
After 8 years of Obamonomics, we are seeing the worst economic recovery in the history of the Republic. One of the cornerstones of Obamonomics is Dodd-Frank, a 2,000-page bill that spawned over 20,000 more pages of mind-numbing, compound, complex, costly regulations that have burdened our economy. Dodd-Frank said it would lift the economy, and instead it has propelled the economy in a bad direction. We are seeing small business lending at a 20-year low, entrepreneurship almost at a generational low. We were told the regulations of Dodd-Frank would end too big to fail, but instead it codified too big to fail into law and backed it up with a taxpayer bailout system. We were told the regulations of Dodd-Frank would make our economy more stable, but the regulations have led to the big banks getting bigger and the small banks getting fewer. We are losing a community financial institution a day in America, and they are not dying of natural causes. They are instead dying from the sheer weight, volume, and complexity and uncertainty of the Dodd-Frank regulatory burden. But the good news is there is a better way. There is a Republican way, and it represents economic growth for all and bank bailouts for none. And so we will put forward a plan to have regulatory reform to where we respect the rule of law, because the rule of law is being displaced by the discretion of regulators. And along with that, people get stuck in poverty. The middle income cannot get ahead. We are going to hold Washington accountable to we the people, not the other way around. Wall Street will be held accountable with the toughest penalties and fines for financial wrongdoing in the history of the Republic. We will deregulate so that we will have an unleashing of economic growth and capital formation. We will have a title totally devoted to saving our community financial institutions, because at the end of the day, every single American, regardless of their circumstance, deserves the opportunity for financial independence. And the way we do that is to hold banks accountable, Washington accountable, and hold Wall Street accountable as well. And so we will look forward to the better way, the Republican way, as we unleash the Financial Choice Act for all Americans. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Shabbat, Chairman of the House Small Business Committee, my district, Cincinnati. And our small businesses create opportunities for millions of Americans all over the country every year. You know, 7 out of every 10 new jobs created in the American economy are created by small business folks. I mean, I love Procter & Gamble and GE Aviation and Macy's Department Store and Kroger's, all headquartered in my district, by the way. But it's small businesses all across the country that we love even more. There are a lot of us standing here today, and the white paper that we're releasing is really long. And the reason for that is that the overregulation on small businesses and businesses all across the country are so great. They're massive. When we talk about reforming and relieving the burdens on our financial institutions, what we're really talking about is keeping the doors open on the community banks, the small banks. The large banks generally are going to get along, but the small banks that loan to small businesses are in big trouble. So are credit unions across the country. And those are where small businesses get the money to either grow and create more jobs or to start up a business that may be a person's dream, might be your dream. When we talk about relieving regulatory burdens on energy and environmental sectors, we're talking about literally keeping the lights on in businesses so that people can stay employed there. When we talk about the overreach of the Department of Labor back here that's behind us right now, we're talking about salaried workers who used to have certainty and benefits. Now all they have to show for their work, their hard work, is a time card. If they're lucky and their job hasn't been eliminated altogether because of the high cost of compliance that come out of places like the Department of Labor back there, and especially the most egregious, I think, of all is this overtime rule, which is creating havoc all across the business world and therefore on employees all across the country. If anyone here today is looking not just for an example of the impact of overregulation, but a solution to it, then they have to look no further than small businesses across the country. I hear this from small businesses everywhere, every week when we hold hearings. And I want to thank the Speaker for putting us together with this task force so that we can actually help the job creators in this country, small businesses, to deal with this horrific overregulation that's coming out of places like that place right back there, the Federal Department of Labor. Thank you.
Hello, friends. I'm Patrick McHenry. I'm the Chief Deputy Whip in the House and the Vice Chair of the Financial Services Committee. My approach to this project is shaped by my personal experience. I'm the son of an entrepreneur who started his business. My father started his business in our backyard using the great financial innovation of his day, which was the charge card. Today, that simply wouldn't be possible. Small business lending at major banks is down nearly 40% over the last decade. But it doesn't have to be that way. Whether it's crowdfunding, angel investing, or fintech, there are multiple new actors harnessing the power of technology and big data to reshape the way families, entrepreneurs, and small businesses access capital. But Washington is getting in the way with bad regulation. Here in D.C., the reflexive reaction to innovation is always more and new regulation. There is a better way. The plan laid out here today highlights just that. With less and smarter regulation coupled with greater access to innovative forms of capital formation like crowdfunding and fintech, we can empower small businesses and entrepreneurs to grow their ideas and create jobs. This will help families and help get communities moving again. This isn't about the next billion-dollar Silicon Valley startup necessarily. It's about the lawn mowing business that was started in my backyard in Gastonia, North Carolina, or that deli started in Bakersfield, California. This is about a better way to grow small businesses, create jobs, and improve the lives of millions of Americans.
The backroom culture of job-killing regulations by unelected Washington bureaucrats has to end. And there's no better example than the U.S. Department of Labor right behind us. In my home district of Southeast Louisiana, some of the best world-known restaurants in New Orleans that people would get their mouths watering just thinking about are right now being faced with the prospect of having thousands of middle management positions being eliminated by these unelected bureaucrats at the Department of Labor. Literally, they're directly responsible for costing thousands of people their chance at the American dream. I'm talking about people that started off as janitors, people that started off as dishwashers, that now finally are part of middle management, are now finally getting to be part of the middle class of this country, which is part of the American dream. And because of a rule by unelected bureaucrats at the Department of Labor, their chance at the American dream is being shattered. This is the kind of regulation that's got to end. This is the kind of transparency we're trying to bring with our agenda that would say if some unelected bureaucrat wakes up one morning with some idea that's going to cost middle-class jobs all across this country, shouldn't it at least have the ray of sunshine of going before a committee on C-SPAN in public view and having the facts presented? And if it's a bad idea, it would get voted down by those of us that actually are held accountable every 2 years before the voters, as opposed to an unelected bureaucrat who has no accountability, yet is directly responsible for the loss of millions of jobs in this economy.
And of course, you can look at the energy industry, which I know all too well in my district of Southeast Louisiana. And we've seen so many job-crushing regulations that have cost us jobs in the United States, that have run jobs to foreign countries all around this world that should be here. These are millions of good jobs. And if you just look at the latest rule and regulation coming out of the Department of Interior, the well control rule, a rule that would actually make it less safe to drill in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, that regulation would not stand up under the scrutiny of a public hearing, yet because an unelected bureaucrat brings it forward, it's now something that's going to actually kill jobs, kill innovation, and kill American energy security, all to carry out some unknown agenda of an unelected bureaucrat. That's not the way things should go in the United States of America. That's why our agenda brings those middle-class jobs back and brings sanity to the regulating process.
I'm Fred Upton, Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And from the very start, our focus has been on jobs in the economy and what can we do to reduce the regulatory burden on so many industries that we might have oversight on. You know, I look at energy. We've come a long way in the last couple of decades. We have an all-of-the-above energy policy. We can actually export energy now when we used to be a net importer. When you look at what we've been able to do with some pieces of legislation like LNG, expediting the approval of LNG. Did you know that today it costs more than $100 million just to prepare the application to go through the regulatory process for one single approval? That's got to change. And we passed bipartisan legislation in both the House and the Senate to do that. Take a look at the Keystone Pipeline. That application was in the application process for more than 6 years before the president ultimately rejected it. We need a time clock. We need a sense of order for the industry so they know what the rules and regulations will be rather than years and years of delays. There's probably not a bigger industry in terms of job creation over the last number of years than the unregulated internet. Whether it's our iPhones, whether it's texting, all of those have come about because we haven't regulated the internet. Yet the courts just today are going to perhaps allow the FCC to re-regulate the internet industry like telephones were 50, 60, 70 years ago. That's not right. And lastly, as we think about healthcare, there's a reason that 50% of the venture capitalists have moved overseas. Why is that? Because the approvals are a lot less overseas than here. We need to streamline that process and still be able to make sure that those drugs and devices are safe. And we know that if we can reduce that time and the regulatory burden, not only do we reduce the cost of getting those approvals done, we also ultimately reduce the cost to the consumer, the family that's being savaged by whatever that disease is. So this is a great start, reducing regulations for all and actually saving jobs, creating jobs, but really reducing the cost to probably the most vulnerable among us, those that can least afford the cost of those high-priced regulations.
Yeah, I'm Rob Bishop, Chairman of the Resource Committee. And in all the talks, we talked about regulations and rules as ideally supposed to be there to protect public health. But when those regulations and rules are outdated and antiquated, they lack local input, they lack state engagement, they actually can produce more harm than good. So let me talk about just one particular area, energy, which is the lifeblood of our American economy. The United States has already surpassed both Russia and Saudi Arabia as the producer of energy. And it's amazing what we've been able to do, except all of that production has taken place on private and state lands. And actually in federal lands and offshore, the energy production has decreased. And it has decreased because of a regulatory system that promotes uncertainty and burdens and holds up jobs and holds up production almost indefinitely. With this document that's released, we're starting on a way of reforming that process so that it will provide states with input, local people with input. It'll increase access and jobs in areas that are primarily designated for that kind of development. And it will ensure that the agencies actually start working rather than simply waiting around and having the federal government doing permits in a matter of years that states and local governments can do in a matter of days. That's the process we need to do. If we can do that kind of development on our federal lands and offshores that we have done on state and private lands, this nation will not only be a leader in energy production, but we can be a source of strength and support to our allies, and we can move this country forward. It's not happening now, but there is a better way. This document is the beginning of that better way.
Good afternoon. My name's Cynthia Lummis. I'm from Wyoming. When I was a little girl growing up in Wyoming, a book called Silent Spring changed the way that Americans looked at the environment and the world around them. It transformed permanently our ethics and ethos about the land in which we live, the importance of clean air, clean water, clean food, clean land, and stewardship became embedded in the American psyche. The way that we regulate from here in Washington, which is 2,000 miles away from my state, you would think that we'd never had that awakening that was evidenced in Silent Spring. We are regulating places that are 2,000 miles away without ever having been there, without ever understanding how people love and take care of the land and air and water that surrounds them. That's why there's a better way. That's why I'm so proud of the better way that Republicans want to choose to involve the government here in Washington with the expertise that we have in the states to take care of a better environment, to respect the land on which we live, and to do it in a way that allows the people to prosper and have jobs and have lives that respect the place in which we live. We're going to be able to transform environmental regulation in a way that will empower the very people that were imbued with the knowledge and the caring that comes with being a person who lives in this great America. Thank you, Paul Ryan, and the conference for devising a better way.
Let me just summarize. The bureaucracy is stifling jobs. The bureaucracy is stifling voices. The bureaucracy is not listening to the American people. And as a result, less jobs, less businesses, less prosperity, lower wages, less take-home pay. This is a better way. This is a better way, which our task forces have shown we can improve the economy by making sure that the regulators respect the people they're supposed to regulate. That is not what's happening. That's what this does. With that, be happy to take any questions.
President Obama refuted your comments today about defining the threat as radical Islamic terrorism, saying that plays right into the hands of groups of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and want to make this a war between religions. What's your response to President Obama?
That doesn't sound much like a regulatory question. Obviously, I stand by what I said. We are at war with radical Islamic terrorism. And yes, there is a very important, from the millions of moderate Muslims who are our allies, our brothers, our sisters, who are helping us in this fight. But that does not mean we should ignore the threat that is facing us. We need to call this threat for what it is if we're going to fully confront it. Nobody, somebody in the sun that's been sitting there the whole time. Sorry, shade people. Yeah. I'm not going to spend my time commenting about every day or every hour. Based upon our several conversations between ourselves, personally, our staffs, and our members, we feel very confident that our presumptive nominee is comfortable with this agenda. More importantly, he knows just as well as we do, by listening to the American people, by traveling this country and talking to people who are suffering under these crippling regulations, that these regulations written by these unelected bureaucrats are costing us jobs and costing us prosperity. So yes, we are comfortable in the fact and the belief that we, with the Republican president, can implement this better way agenda. Yes, two different branches of government negotiate the details, but the thrust and the direction of this is clear. We know there's a better way. 7 out of 10 Americans don't think this country's heading in the right direction. We agree with that. So does our nominee. That is why we're offering this better way. Yeah. Well, I would say you have to take a look at the 1952 INA Act to get the answer to your question there. But we will be following up on Thursday at 9:30 in the Statutory Hall of Congress, where the first House of Representatives met, to show just what resuscitating and reclaiming and replacing the Article 1 is with the status quo we have. We will reclaim the Constitution, the principle of self-government, and as to your specific question, at the law itself to get your